and we're going to spend some time with it. And it's going to be rough going at first, as we already found out, but we'll keep going back over it until it seems so obvious that you can't believe that it wasn't obvious in the first place. Which is the usual pattern, right? Now, Israel's been around for 400 years, and this is going to be the greatest change that Israel's going to go through until the exile. So, a lot can change in 400 years, and yet the same pattern had prevailed from the time of Moses to the time of Samuel. 400 years is a long time. How was New England doing in 400 years ago? Well, 400 years ago was prehistoric times in New England, right? Right? What do you need for history? What do you... What? Written records, yes. Yeah. Okay. Let's say in defense of Samuel's sons, Joel and Abijah. Joel's son is Heman. Who's that? The family is going to turn up later. They may not have ascended to the judgeship because they weren't considered by the people anywhere near the stature of their father, but they're going to turn up later. Who was Heman? Someone in David's court, indeed. He was the chief of the musicians in Solomon's temple. His name is plastered all over the Psalms. That Heman is Samuel's grandson. Okay. So, they may not have been very good candidates for judgeship, but they weren't like Eli's sons. They didn't bring ruin on themselves and their children. Okay. The two sons are in Judah, which is very, very interesting. Because Judah doesn't seem to be part of the Israelite League, does it? Yeah. Yes, Samuel lived in Benjamin. What do you think the sons were doing in Judah? Isn't that very odd? More on this later. Is it a hint that the grandchildren turn up in David's court? Is that a hint? Yes.
Maybe that's why Israel didn't like him as judges.
There could have been some feeling that if they are bigwigs in Judah, then what? Then they're not going to be judges in Israel. Are you suggesting that there was some rivalry between Israel and Judah?
Yeah.
These are all God's people now. This is not what you're suggesting, is it? Again, let me ask what evidence there is that Israel and Judah were already two distinct units who didn't get along so well. Anyone?
When there were battles, Judah was never there.
Judah was never there. Yes. Can you name some battles where Judah wasn't? The Battle of Ebenezer. That's pretty obvious. Samuel and all Israel in the idealized picture overcome Philistia, and there's no Judeans. And none of the Judean sub-tribes are there. That's a real good example because it's right at this time. Anything else? Can you name some other battles that tell us that Judah was not part of the Israelite League? This is going to explain so much of what we're about to see in the following chapters if you get this down. Can you name some more evidence? Well, this huh?
Well, in 1 Samuel 11:8, it's talking about the numbering. It talks about the children of Israel were 300,000 and the men of Judah 30,000. So
well, you didn't mean 1,000, but you got it right on. That Saul was able to gather contingents from all Israel. And he also gathered a certain number of contingents from Judah. What does that tell you?
Two different.
Judah's a different place. It tells you what Saul's trying to do. What is Saul trying to do?
Unite.
He's trying to unite them. And he's gathering these contingents to do what?
Only, well, to go to war.
Keep going. You started out right, and then he misdirected
They were
you.
going to save the people of Jabesh.
Where's Jabesh of Gilead?
Well, it must be in Gilead.
Oh, yes. Jabesh of Gilead is in Gilead. It happens to be the largest city of Gilead. Now, what have we already seen in Judges? What about Gilead?
Sort of out of the...
In fact, we already saw this in Joshua.
They had their own stuff.
Gilead has got its own assembly. That's another Israelite league. Now, Saul is gathering men of Israel and contingents from Judah to save Gilead. What's he trying to do?
Unite all three.
He's trying to get an all-Israelite confederacy because he's figured out that he cannot overcome the surrounding nations who are pressing in on them unless what? He can unite the whole group. He's trying to do something that's never been done before. So far, is Saul nutty? So far? No, so far so good. Okay. All right. Now, let's review. We read in 1 Samuel 8:4 that all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. And we understand from what we've just said that all these elders of Israel are who?
The tribal leaders.
The tribal leaders of what? What would be the northernmost tribe of this group here? Dan? Yes. Dan, Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun, Issachar, I'm doing pretty good, Manasseh, Ephraim, southernmost tribe, Benjamin. Okay? Did you get it? The Gileadites aren't in it. The Judeans aren't in it. This is Israel. They gathered to Samuel at Ramah and said, "You're old and your sons don't walk in your ways." Now we have already given some political reasons why the Israelite leaders may have rejected Samuel's sons. If the sons are in Judah, something has gone amok that the text isn't saying. But if they're leaders in Judah, then something has gone awry having to do with Samuel's sons. In any case, and we'll talk about it later, the leaders of Israel, the assembly, doesn't want Samuel's sons. Now, question. This is all written from the viewpoint of the prophetic movement. Is Samuel mad because they have rejected him personally, or because they've rejected God? I mean, is he just insulted on a personal level, or have they rejected God?
I think maybe the two are combined because, I mean, at this point, Israel was a theocracy, and the prophet was an instrument through which that was carried out.
I said this is written from the viewpoint of the prophetic movement, which is a dead giveaway to the answer to the question. Ed, are you hiding this week? Tell me something about, from the viewpoint of the prophetic movement, about the prophet personally. Is it wise to attack the prophet personally? No? Can you give me some examples? The king said, oh, he's going to say that, is he? I want you to go out and get him and bring him here in chains. Okay? So they went out with their spears to get him. And what happened?
Fire came down.
And consumed them. And a second time, what?
Same thing.
And a third time, the captain said what? Look, have me. I work for the king. He can kill me if I don't do what he says. He said to come and get you. Please don't burn me up. I'm just doing what I was told to do. Okay? That's a good example. What's it? What?
The case of Elisha.
Some young men made the mistake of calling the prophet a bald old man, which at the moment, what? He was. But they were doing their teenage rabble-rouser routine, and what? Bears came out and did that. So the point is that from the viewpoint of the prophetic school, to attack the prophet personally is what? Is to attack God. And bad things can happen as a result. Okay, so there is no question here that it's Samuel personally who's being attacked. He takes it as a personal attack, and that is intended to be seen as an attack on God in the narrative. All right. A question that has exercised Bible scholars for centuries and has caused the narrative we're reading and divided into subunits this way and that way, dissected back and forth with the pro-monarchic and anti-monarchic subunits and their sources, and all of it is wrong, is the narrative for the monarchy or against the monarchy? Well, we've learned often enough that when you get one of these arguments, the narrative is pro-monarchic, the narrative is anti-monarchic, the narrative is made up of disparate elements that have been edited together poorly that are pro-monarchic and anti-monarchic. There is always another possible answer, and what is that? That the author intends to be to love. That reality can be made up of opposites held in tension without things flying apart, that's the nature of life. Samuel himself is let down easy. Remember when God said to Moses, step aside so that I could destroy them, so as to place Moses in the position of doing what? To intercede, yes. Here, Samuel is told, it's okay, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me, which they've done from the beginning. This is really a psychological viewpoint. It's not your fault. Don't worry about it. Go ahead and do it, even though he's very much against the idea. What does he do? Well, if God tells him to do it, then what? Then by definition, what? He's for it. Yes, regardless if he's for it through clenched teeth, right? Can you be for something through clenched teeth? Yes, you can. It happens a lot in life. And this is one of those times. All right? Now, we had a lot of guessing and confusion about what Samuel was up to in 8:10 and following. And he certainly was up to something. Samuel still hopes to save the day.
I was reading this over last night, and while that wasn't what they were asking for, it was really a problem, because in years later, that's what the monarchy evolved into. That's what Samuel was talking about.
Okay, but the important point is that he ends up with a theological prediction in verse 18. In that day, which is a technical prophetic term, you will cry out because of your king whom you've chosen for yourselves, but Yahweh will not answer you on that day. Now, I suppose you could say that such a day never came because for other reasons they got there too soon. But in any case, what he's describing, we know for sure, is the contemporary model of Canaanite kingship. This is how contemporary Canaanite kingship operated. His description of taking a tithe of the people, taking a census in order to have 10% of the people under the control of the monarchy. This is a description of how kings operated at the time. So, as a prediction, it's spoiled by the fact that it's current events. And what he's doing is he's trying to scare them off from monarchy by describing the worst aspects of monarchy that he can. And especially those aspects of monarchy that the assembly would be most likely to react against. because it's the assembly that stands to lose power right after the priesthood and prophets in this setup here. All right. Now, they do say, no, but we want a king. Again, what was the reason that there had developed such a strong feeling pro-monarchic party at this time? Yeah, but why? Well, 1 Samuel 13 and 14 reveals, and we haven't read it yet, but reveals that the first thing Saul had to do was clear the age-long path, which tells us the Philistines had already fortified the path into the central highlands. When Saul died, 1 Samuel 31 tells us that his and his son's bodies were hung on the walls of Bethshan, the great fortress city in the northern Jordan Valley. Now, of course, the thing that connects the northern Jordan Valley to the coastal plain is the Valley of Jezreel that runs east-west across the top of the country, that cuts the northern tribes off from the central tribes. And so we have to presume that if the Philistines are in the Jordan Valley, where else are they? They're in the Jezreel Valley. And so on how many sides of Israel are they? 3 sides. And in fact, 1 Samuel 31:7 says that they've extended their control up out of the Jordan Valley into Gilead, that the Philistines controlled the King's Highway. Okay? And this then doesn't surprise us that Saul died on Mount Gilboa, which is the mountains overlooking the Jezreel Valley. He was trying to cut off the Philistines on the coastal plain to the west from the Philistines in the Jordan Valley and Transjordan on the east, which is exactly what they had done with Israel by getting the Jordan Valley and cutting off Gilead from the rest, by getting the Ajalon Path and cutting off the northern Israelite tribes from the southern Israelite tribes. Now we must presume, based on other evidence, that where was Judah in all this? Where were the Judean tribes in all this? What were they up to while Israel was being cut in half by the Jezreel Valley, cutting the northern tribes off from the southern tribes, cutting the Transjordanian tribes off of them? Where was Judah in all this? They were the ones who lived immediately behind the Philistines. Where were they in all this? Okay, but Ed, the nature of the Philistine rule being such that they couldn't just be conspicuously absent.
They were probably just in subjection.
Just in what was that word you just used? They were what?
In subjection.
In subjection. You left out what? Yes, they were just in subjection. Can you give me any evidence for that?
Well, there was this where it said that none of Israel had any iron implements. They had to go to the Philistines to get their plowshares.
Yes. Yes, so obviously it would be easy for the Judeans too to have been subjected to the Philistines. That's a good deduction. Anything else? Well, now think about it. What else do you know from Samuel Kings?
Which period? Before Saul or during Saul?
So I'd like to look at the period leading up to Saul, say the 20 or 30 years before Saul and the 20 or 30 years after Saul. Let's look at this 50-year period and what I'm trying to find out, Pete, is what caused kingship to arise now? They've been invaded for 300 years in the period of the Judges. They've been in a defensive posture in those mountains for hundreds of years now. What was it about this time that made the people think we have just got to face up to it, we've got to get a monarchy, and we've got to get together What was it that they were so concerned about that made this pro-monarchic feeling so strong?
They lost the ark.
Well, that certainly must have scared the wits out of everybody. The loss of the ark to the Philistines must have been certainly, and the subsequent destruction of Shiloh, the league capital, right, must have been an absolutely terrifying moment for everybody. And certainly, I think that's one of the things that would have played a tremendous influence in causing people to rethink what they needed to do.
In answer to your question, well, you know, the all of David's brothers went to war with Saul. I mean, that sort of tells you that, I mean, there were some Judeans that were concerned about it.
Well, if you were Saul, I said, what would be one of your great concerns if you were in Saul's position? The far northern tribes, Dan, Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun, Issachar, right down in the Jezreel Valley, are cut off from those south of the Jezreel Valley. One of the things you're going to have to do is what? Get back those northern tribes which are lost to Israel now. What else are you going to have to do? You've got to get some backing from Judah. If you were in Saul's position, what's one of the very first things you'd want to do? Remember, he's a Benjaminite. I said, if the lot had fallen on anybody but Benjamin, I would have been astounded and would have told Samuel to cast the lots again if he couldn't figure out what God was telling him. Get it? The lot couldn't have fallen anywhere else but on Benjamin. Saul was a Benjaminite, okay, from one of those families on the west end that were facing the Philistines, okay? If you were in Benjamin, the southernmost tribe of the league, on the west end facing the Philistines, what would you want to do? I would try to get as much support out of Judah, even if they were in subjection to the Philistines, as I could think of. Any way that I could coach the cousins from the south to risk Philistine wrath and come along with us, I would. What might be some ways you could do that? Marriage. What if I could get some Judean leading families, the warrior families, to intermarry with my family? Now we're running ahead of the story, but you see where we're going. Okay, what are some of the other things that could be done? Well, what's the other area that you're going to have to take care of rather quickly? Well, no. First, geopolitically, what have you got to do? You've got to do east. You've got to do the east, which involves dealing with somehow regaining the Jordan Valley. And yes, of course, you've got to fortify your western frontier so that they get the Philistines out of the passes, try to protect those passes so they can't keep coming up the passes, so that you at least have a place to live where you can fortify yourselves, right? Got to deal with Gilead and the problem of the Jordan Valley somehow. Yes?
I was just thinking about this battle of Ebenezer, like where it's talking about the Philistines were subdued and they did not come anymore into the territory of Israel. We read that as Israel, not necessarily Judah.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't really saying anything at all about what was happening in Judah.
No, it isn't saying anything about what was happening in Judah. But I'm going to continue on that line. What's some other evidence that there may have been considerable alignment of Judah with the Philistines?
Well, later on, David was with the Philistines.
Well, it isn't very much later on. When David fell out of favor with Saul, David was a Judean prince. What did he do? He went straight to the head king of the head tyrant of the Philistines and said what? Yep. And did Achish said Judeans don't work for me? No, he gave him one of the Judean cities and said protect the Judean frontier. And when Saul was chasing David around Judah, David found it amazingly possible to go from this place to that place in Judah, and what? Somehow Saul just couldn't get him. What does that tell you? Yeah, he had friends, and those friends were perfectly willing to be aligned with the Philistines. Okay. Now, so, go on. Why the feeling among the elders of Israel that we need kingship this time? What have they lost?
There wasn't any tribute being paid. They've lost something that would be benefited around which they could rally.
Well, give me some things they've lost.
We lost all the trade.
Well, they lost the King's Highway, so they've lost trade. Yeah. Yes. Is there going to be a unified religion if you've lost all the northern tribes north of the Jezreel Valley? If you lose all the tribes east of the Jordan Valley? If you've lost any real relationship to the tribes south of Benjamin, what have they lost? Everything. That's the point. The elders of Israel looked around and said what?
There's nothing left.
What happened to Israel? What did the elders of Israel who wanted this clearly feel? If we don't take action now, what? There won't be an Israel. I'm sure a lot of them felt this hardly in Israel now. Why had they waited so long? What do you think? Why had they waited so long? I mean, this is a pretty bleak picture. Why do you think they waited so long? Isn't it clear why they waited so long?
The power of Samuel there.
Samuel, for one thing. And the deep-seated feeling what? That monarchy was bad in what sense? What was it?
Corruption.
How about pagan? Monarchy was pagan, right? Yeah.
Not everything down to gold.
Oh,
He said
yes.
gold, everything there.
Yes, he paid kingship in its worst possible tones, but certainly they knew about Canaanite kingship.
And a lot of the characteristics of the kingship as described by Samuel are really characteristics of a theocracy, but with a human as the head.
Okay, the characteristics that you see here could be in a theocracy anyway, only now there's a king as a head. One person's got all control of all of these things.
A lot of the tithing and all this other, it was
Stuff that was done to the sanctuary,
yes.
only now it's being transferred to the monarchy. You are correct. It
So
was.
what they're saying is the monarchy is putting man in the place of God. I mean, in the sense of the pagan.
Well, just how bad was the crisis if, after Samuel has described this, and they know this to be the characteristics of pagan monarchy, they say in verse 19, no, but we will have a king over us. What does that tell you? Yes, that shows the level of desperation, right? Yes, they were free to act. Why? Because they felt there was nothing to lose. Absolutely. And the fact that the elders of Israel have come to this decision. The elders of Israel by nature are liberal or conservative. What? Ultra-conservative? Yeah, the elders of Israel are ultra-conservative, aren't they? Right? Of all the people who would not want monarchy, who would it be? It would be the elders of Israel. What does it tell you in verse 4 when it says all the elders of Israel gathered together? Huh?
The governing body.
Yes, but
There was a lot of cohesion between them and what they were going to ask.
well, where had these people come from then?
The reason the first one was to first hear it when it's all come together.
To call for such an assembly. We've seen that in Jephthah's time that the assembly of Gilead felt perfectly willing to act on its own and tell the Ephraimites to bet out of our business, please. Right? The assembly of the northern tribes felt perfectly willing to chase the Midianites out ruthlessly and tell the Ephraimites, stay out of our business, please. Right? When they're all there, what does that tell you about this assembly? What could have motivated such an assembly? Obviously, if the people from Gilead and the people from the far northern tribes are represented, what are they feeling?
They must have felt like they were close to national extinction.
Yes, they felt that they were close to national extinction, and for this group to come en group to Samuel, right, the theocratic head, and say, look, and they've come all the way to his home in Ramah. What does that tell you? Yes.
They were close to national extinction.
Yes, they were close. It wasn't just they were feeling that, they were.
But how far was God willing to take this? Would he allow them to become extinct? He didn't want them to have a king. He wanted them to remain strict theocracy, right? How far was God willing to take this?
Probably right to hear it, and he probably would have either gone one way or the other. Right? If we were here. They made their choice with the wrong one. He brought them to the place where they had to make a choice, and they made it. The bad one, but they made the
It
choice.
wasn't the wrong choice.
No.
At this time, it was the right choice.
I guess I'm wondering if this is just another example where they misinterpreted the source of the trouble. I mean, there was a real crisis, but I mean, they saw it strictly in geopolitical terms. And I think probably if you look at the overall story, I think the writer has another idea as to why they've come to this point.
Well, the prophetic movement thinks it's not a political crisis. He thinks it's a spiritual crisis. And that had the spiritual crisis been solved, they were okay. They were safe.
So what was that?
This is probably the only time you get them all together. They finally came to the point where they all came together. They were all done the same thing.
Well, now, we can have the same argument here that the assembly had, when was this, the 11th century, 31 centuries ago, about whether this is a bad move or not. That's why 1 Samuel 8 to 12 is pro-monarchic and anti-monarchic at once. Viewed from one point of view, the authors say this could be looked at as a bad choice. Viewed at from another point of view, it could have been a great choice. If what? Well, we're talking about monarchy itself.
If it had not done what he had predicted it would do, and if they had been able to control the monarchy.
Yes. Stop right there. Don't anybody say anything. If you could have got the right kind of monarchy and could have controlled it, it could have been a sharpening of the theocracy. Chapter 10. Well, is it 10? Samuel sent them all away, didn't he?
Yes.
And then he told them to come back later. 10:17. I'm sure the elders of Israel would have been interested to knowing that 31 centuries later we'd still be discussing their choice. Samuel charges them with breach of covenant and then goes ahead and anoints a king. Now here's irony piled on irony. Right? If it's truly breach of covenant beyond control, then don't do it. Just say no. But he's
God's servant, and God doesn't work that way. God gives you a choice and then tries to work with the choice you made.
Okay. Now, verse 25 says, just what came up in Connell's comment. Then Samuel told the people the legal rights of kingship, mishpat, and he wrote them in a book and laid it up before Yahweh. Now, every time we hear about the writing of something in the Bible, we find out that there's something that relates to that. We don't hear about God writing the law and then we don't know what the law is. We don't hear that Moses wrote the duties of the covenant unless we have the covenant code. See? It tells us in Exodus that he wrote down the covenant laws, and then the next thing that follows is the covenant code. Okay? Whenever we hear in the Bible that something's written, we have it. There's a couple of things that we don't have, but we have every reason to believe they existed. Later on, DTR 1 is going to tell us if you want to read all the political details of this king's reign, then read the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. Now, while we can't do that, we have every reason to believe what? That there were Chronicles of the Kings of Judah, that they absolutely did exist. And when he talks about the northern kings and says you can find out the rest of these details by reading the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel, what are we absolutely sure of? Though they may not have survived, what? There certainly were Chronicles of the Kings of Israel from which he was. Yes. Now, where's this? The mishpat of kingship. The legal dues, okay, the legal rights of kingship. Do you understand from our discussion that one of Samuel's great motivations as he made a king would be to make sure it was the right kind of kingship and the right kind of king? Is that clear? And is it clear that having the right kind of kingship is what makes it possible to have kingship at all in Samuel's mind? That if you have the right kind of kingship, it's an acceptable idea. If you have the wrong kind of kingship, what has Samuel already said it is? It's pagan, it's breach of covenant, and therefore Samuel would have to say what? No. Okay, so now look. Samuel can only be doing this after what he said if he's clear in his own mind and has made it clear to everybody else that the kind of kingship we're going to have is what? Is the right kind. He makes this very clear by telling the people the mishpat of the king and writing it down. What's the purpose of telling the whole assembly this is what's going to be the legal duties of kingship? And their person is right there. Now this person, this king, is the creature of this assembly, right? They've created it at their insistence. And Samuel is telling this assembly, what? This is what the legal duties of kingship are, and he's holding the assembly responsible for what? For running this kingship this way. Very interesting. And because it is of telling importance, he not only speaks to them about it, he what? He writes it down. Is this the sort of thing that's likely to get lost? This is way too important to get lost. This is the sort of thing that would be around forever. And every time a king got out of line, what's he likely to hear? From the prophet. It says, have you forgotten that Samuel said, and do you think the kings of Israel ever got sick of that? Yes, they did. How do we know? It says so. But that means that what? That this legal constitution of kingship was what? Was still around. Boy, is there anywhere in the Bible where laws from the northern kingdom survived, kept by the prophetic movement? Is there such a section of the Bible? Deuteronomy! Yes. We've all come to know and love the fact that Deuteronomy represents the northern kingdom's
law code.
Law code. Oh, I I wonder then if this very important thing might have survived. And if I'm going looking for it, where will I go? I'll go to Deuteronomy. Now guess what? As I search through Deuteronomy, what do I discover? A law about kingship, which Moses put in there. Yes. And moreover, the law about kingship says this is the mishpat of the king, the legal duties of kingship. Interesting. Okay. And when I get there, I find that certain interests in this law apply only to the time of Samuel and no other. Interesting. Now, where is the law of the king? 17 what? 14. We've all come to recognize that important matters don't just get plunged into. Something as important as kingship is what? It's going to have what?
Preparation.
Yes, preparation. Covenant, yes.
Rules and regulations.
Various rules and regulations. If I were setting up a monarchy, would I discuss just the king? In Samuel's discussion in 1 Samuel 8, did he discuss just the king? Let's go back there to 1 Samuel 8:10. What did he start discussing? These will be the mishpat of the king. Let me see. He's talking about sons and chariotry and horses and commanders and plowmen and reapers, implements of war and chariotry and daughters as perfumers, cooks and bakers, vineyards and all. He seems to be discussing an awful lot of stuff other than the king himself. Would somebody like to tell me where the legal constitution of kingship begins? Well, what's just in front of it? What's right in front of the law about a king? Okay, would that have anything to do with monarchy? Sure. Appointment of judges and officers, does that have anything to do with monarchy? Yes. Obviously, the section ending in verse 16, verse 17, 16, 17 is something else. It's something to do with the year of release, releasing slaves, firstlings and males, Passover, Feast of Weeks, Tabernacles. All of a sudden, at verse 18, we come to an entirely new topic. Deuteronomy 16:18. Everybody with me? Here's how it begins. And it's a series of directives. You shall appoint judges and officers in all your towns which Yahweh your God gives you, according to your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. You shall not pervert justice. You shall not show partiality, and you shall not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and subverts the cause of the righteous. What was Samuel's office? What was he? He was in charge. And what were his sons? Judges in Judah. And what had they been accused of by the elders of Israel? Accepting bribes. Oh, that's very interesting. You shall not... Now, how many judges are there going to be now? Many. As many judges as there are towns. Do you think this would be a change? This is a big change. So we're not going to rely on one titular head called the judge, who every important case, no matter how far away you have to traverse land and sea to get to, what? There's going to be a local judge who's to administer justice, and the basic wording is about bribery. For a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and subverts the cause of the righteous. Justice, and only justice, you shall follow, that you may live and inherit. This word also means subdue. This Hebrew word inherit also means subdue the land which Yahweh your God gives you. And given the time in which this was written, the translation subdue would be a better translation here. Now, you shall not plant any tree as an Asherah beside the altar of Yahweh which you shall make. Remember what Samuel had done? He had set up a what? He had set up an altar because the tabernacle or the temple of Yahweh had been destroyed. Okay? You shall not set up a cult pillar which Yahweh your God hates. You shall not sacrifice to Yahweh your God an ox or a sheep in which is a blemish, any defect whatever, for that is an abomination to Yahweh your God. I wonder why this is said. I wonder what was going on that caused that to come in right there. If there is found among you within any of your towns which Yahweh your God gives you, a man or woman who does what is evil in the sight of Yahweh your God in transgressing his covenant, and has gone and served other gods and worshipped them. And then there is the addition that I told you clearly, structurally, grammatically, is an awkward addition, or the sun or moon or any of the host of heaven which I have forbidden, which is an awkward grammatical addition which clearly comes from the time of Assyria when the worship of the sun and moon became popular in Judah. But skipping over those words, and has gone and served after other gods and worshipped them, and has told you, and you hear of it, then you shall inquire diligently, and if it's true and certain that such an abominable thing has been done in Israel, then you shall bring forth to your gates that man or woman who has done this evil thing, and you shall stone that man or woman to death with stone. On the evidence of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses, he that is to die shall be put to death. A person shall not be put to the death on the evidence of a single witness. The hand of the witnesses shall be the first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of the people. So you shall purge the evil from the midst of you. This is written in a time when there is real danger in Israel of what? Of a turn toward, yes, with the Asherah, the male cult pillars, the blemished offerings, the people in the towns saying, let's serve other gods. There is a growing tendency to idolatry at the time that this is written. What could have caused this growing tendency toward idolatry? Yeah. That's right. There was, yes. Now, the next part is very significant. If any case arises requiring decision between one kind of homicide and another, one kind of legal right and another, which happens all the time, freedom of speech versus safety, public safety. I mean, that sort of thing happens all the time, right? If one kind of homicide, one kind of legal right and another, one kind of assault or another, any case within your towns which is too difficult for you, then you shall arise and go up to the place which Yahweh your God will choose, and coming to the Levitical priests and the judge who is in office in those days, you shall consult them, and they shall declare to you the decision. There's all kinds of ramifications of that sentence. First of all, you can't have a high court until what? Until you have lower court. This is a continuation of, you shall appoint judges in all your towns. Is that clear? You can't have the one without the other. Now, when you come to one of these involved legal disputations between one kind of right and another, go to the judge who's in office in those days, who heads the Levitical court. The very statement makes it clear that there will be a high judge, and the high judge is chosen from the Levitical priesthood. Whose right is protected here? Whose authority is enlarged here? The priesthood's rights are enlarged here and made permanent and powerful. From among the Levitical priesthood, there's going to be chosen what? A high judge. May I suggest such a person? Might there be any candidate on the scene for such a role? Okay. You shall consult them. The high judge is the head, the chief justice of what? Of the high court, made up entirely of priests. We haven't even gotten to it yet, but I'm sure you're a wise group of people. You understand whose authority and potential power is being snipped away here, sentence by sentence. Whose? Who isn't going to be the high judge? The king. Who isn't going to have control over the central worship? The king. Yes. And they shall declare to you the decision. Then you shall do according to what they declare to you from that place which Yahweh will choose. And you shall be careful to do according to all that they direct you, according to the instructions which they give you, and according to the decision which they pronounce to you, you shall do, and you shall not turn aside from the verdict which they declare to you, either to the right hand or the left. Good Deuteronomic language. So, not only do they give decisions, we've decided in favor of this man, he's not going to die, but what else do they do? They render, as our Supreme Court does what? They render opinions which control society, which is what the role of a Supreme Court is. You understand that our Supreme Court was modeled after this? Not surprising, is it? The court then doesn't merely render decisions. The decisions are what? Not just verdicts, as in the case of a normal court, but what? Precedent for what? The whole society. Whose authority is getting snipped away? Yes. All right. The man who acts presumptuously by not obeying the priest who stands to minister there before Yahweh your God, or the judge, that man shall die. And I notice,
Even if it is the king.
well, I notice that capital punishment, and I noticed this before, is in the hands of what? This judgeship that's being set up. So, what?
That's where it got that. Supreme Court's the final arbiter and guys like that.
That's right. If you went with this, you wouldn't have a king. What would you have? You'd have a president. Yeah. You'd end up with a president, not a king. Hey, this is a great system. Somebody ought to try this. Yeah. Now, let's skip over the kingship itself for the moment, okay? Let's continue and see what's right after it. The Levitical priests, that is all the tribe of Levi. Now listen, what was Samuel's family? Where were they from?
By heredity, his father was an Ephraimite.
By heredity, his father was an Ephraimite.
What was he doing
Well, he was a Ziphite. Or something. What are you reading?
1 Samuel 1:1. So I got Elkanah.
1 Samuel 1:1. You don't need to read very far in Samuel before you find that out. The son of Jerachmeel, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zoph, and Ephraimite. Right? 1 Chronicles 6. 1 Chronicles 6. And remember that 1 Chronicles these chronicles come from the second edition, and the second chronicler, who was probably Ezra, we are indebted to for all this information. Verses 27, 34, and 35. 1 Chronicles 6 in verse 27. What do we have here? Elkanah his son, Zophai his son, Nahath his son, Eliab his son, Jeroham his son, Elkanah his son, sons of Samuel, Joel the firstborn, Abijah. See, Abihu, Abijah, we've seen that before. Sons of, who are all these? Do you see verse 16, the beginning of the paragraph? The sons of Levi, the following. These are the names of, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, so what does verse 27 say is the lineage of Samuel? He's a Levite. Verse 34, sons of Elkanah, son of Jeroham, son of Eliel, son of Toah, son of Zoph, son of Elkanah, son of Mahath, son of Amasai, son of Elkanah, son of Joel, son of Azariah, son of Zephaniah, son of Tahath, son of Asher, son of Abiasaph, son of Korah, son of Issar, son of Kohath, son of Levi, son of Israel. Well, we've got two ways to go, and we know with genealogies that we've got a very tricky problem with genealogies. They describe political, social, and economic relationships, as well as geographical. So that either Samuel was an Ephraimite who is grafted into the Levitical line because he serves as a priest, and therefore ever after his children are looked at as Levites, or he's a Levite living in Ephraim and not serving as a priest. A dispossessed line of priests, and the child takes up the profession legitimately, and it's a Levitical family that had no, that because they weren't serving at a central sanctuary, didn't get to have any priestly functions. Let me remind you that in Leviticus and Numbers, the P code, the Aaronite code, who only could be priests? Only Aaron's immediate family. What were all the rest of the Levites?
Oh, they took care of the temple.
They could be temple slaves if they chose, but they could not ever ascend to the priesthood or have the rights and duties of priesthood. But here in Deuteronomy, this very law that we're reading did something dramatic. And we noted as we studied Deuteronomy that this was totally different from P and represented a completely different approach. In Deuteronomy, how many Levites may act as priests? All. Now, Richard, on the basis of that, since I know who's writing, what do I think? Do I think Samuel's family was Ephraimites or Levites who'd been dispossessed from any function?
I'd say the latter.
Do you suppose that Samuel's own experience and his family's experience as non-functioning Levites made him sensitive to the position of the Levites and caused him to be able to receive from God the law that says, notice I'm saying this, it's so wonderfully put, that any Levite descendant of Levi can function as a priest. There is particularly here an anti-Eli hint, right? Because who had control of the ark and the whole priestly function in 1 Samuel? Eli. Why? Not because they were descendants, ironically, of Aaron, but what? Because they were descendants of Moses. Clearly, in Eli, who only could be priests? Descendants of Moses. If you were a Mushite, you could be a priest, and if you were anybody else, what? You couldn't. And here in Deuteronomy, we find this law. The Levitical priests, that is, all the tribe of Levi. Nothing could be clearer. The term Levitical priests already would be amazing. Say, I just have a question. Is the air conditioning on?
Yeah,
Well, maybe just turn the fan off. Just turn the fan off and we'll be better off. The fresh air is good. You're more awake than you've been in weeks. Yeah, it's a work of the Lord. Ed, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to go over, once again, you said, the passage
Yes. Genealogies don't tell us, we've been through this many times, don't tell us biological facts all the time. They may, but ancient genealogies told us social, economic, political relationships. Okay? We have two statements about the family of Samuel. 1 Samuel 1:1 says in a sort of offhand way that he was an Ephraimite. It's a linear genealogy. You can't exactly tell what that means. It either means he lives in Ephraim, so he's an Ephraimite, or else it means by descent he's biologically a son of Ephraim. You can't tell what 1 Samuel 1:1 is trying to say. The chronicler says absolutely that the family of Samuel, but meaning Elkanah his father, that the family of Samuel was a direct descendant of one of the three priestly families, three Levitical families, Gershom, Kohath, and Merari. They were Kohathites, okay? They had care of the ark. They were descendants of that family, according to the chronicler. At least that's what Ezra says. Now, the question is, did they get grafted into the Levitical genealogy just because the mother gave Samuel to the priesthood and he became a priest, and therefore he was a priest and all his children ever after? Or did she do that because they were priests in the first place, only Levites, dispossessed from the priesthood because they weren't Moshites? Okay, suffice it to say that Samuel's descendants were one of the main families that ran the temple. Okay. So certainly they were considered high Levites thereafter. The question is, biologically, were they descended from Levi, or did they just happen to get that genealogy given to them because of Samuel's career? I'm saying that the law in Deuteronomy 18 suggests that they were Levites in the first place, but they were dispossessed Levites who had no role or function or right to the priesthood because they'd been dispossessed, and Samuel made it the law that all Levites were priests. Shall I keep reading? The Levitical priest, that is, all the tribe of Levi, shall have no portion or inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the offerings by fire to Yahweh and his rightful dues, and there's going to be more reason for me to say that here in a moment. They shall have no inheritance among their brethren. For Yahweh is their inheritance that he promised them. And this shall be the priest's mishpat. The priest's legal dues. Okay, there's that same word mishpat. It keeps coming up. It's a theme. It's what's the legal constitutional rights of these various groups. Here's the priest's mishpat. Now look, what did the priest get at Shiloh that caused all the trouble? Yes, we noticed that the meat was boiled, and we saw that was different from Leviticus. That isn't what was done in Leviticus, and then we turned over here to this passage, and we found out it isn't what was done in Deuteronomy either. And we said, that's interesting. It isn't what was done in Judah, it isn't what was done in Israel, but it was done in Shiloh. And I said to you, this is the earlier, this thing that was going on with Eli's family. This was the original thing, and it got straightened out because it didn't work. You took they boiled the meat, you took the three-pronged fork and what? You stuck it in, and whatever you got, what? Was yours. And what if what you got was this big? That was this big, everybody. And you've got your 5 children. What? Then what'd you have to say? That's it. That's it. Right? Yep. And the sons of Eli wouldn't stand for that. If it didn't come up right, what? Yes, until they got the best of it, right? Okay. Is this a system that's fraught with potential disaster? Yes. And what happened? We know that human nature being what it is, that's controlled by Murphy's Law, the worst thing that can happen, it happens. And so what do we have here? Read this. This is the mishpat of the priests from the offering, those offering a sacrifice, whether it be ox or sheep. They shall give to the priest the shoulder and the 2 cheeks and the stomach. What's the story here?
Sounds a little better.
Well, now look. You get the shoulder, both sides of the rump, and all the fat portions in the stomach, the intestines, everything. What do we say? What? Yeah, they're getting the best part of the meat. I know that all of you aren't meat cutters, but you should be able to recognize what? If the priest gets one shoulder and both of the rumps and all of the bottom, what have you got left? You've got the other shoulder. Yes, and the feet and the head. What's going on here? What just happened there? The priest just got elevated. There'll never be a reason again. There will never be a reason again for a priest to come into conflict with the people over not getting enough to support himself. Do you hear that? And there will never be a Levitical family again that will be poor because they've been dispossessed from being priests. I'm going to ask again, who's the writer? Samuel. Then what's it doing among Moses' writings? Let us say again, in case you've missed it. As far as they were concerned, what? Samuel was Moses. Okay.
Samuel must have suffered much under Eli. I mean, his animosity years.
Well, when you consider that if Samuel wrote this is written late in his life. Certain lessons were learned when he was a little boy that what? Weren't ever forgotten. Yeah.
Well, in a way, if he was a descendant of the family who had charge of the ark by inheritance, and he saw Eli let the ark go.
Lose it by default.
By default.
Yes.
He had
I'm sure that
was my right.
That would have been a terrible thing to live through and see and have to put up with. Yes.
And then on the other hand, he knows that he relaxed. So he's really good.
And yet, notice this, Cornell, he never did any of this. If what I'm telling you is correct, and I believe it, that there's no other way to conclude, he never did any of this while he was the judge and ruler of Israel all his life. This all came about as what? As a result of what? Demand for monarchy. He never did all this in his lifetime. That was his point. Did I ever claim anything for myself? Yeah. Okay. Now, it says, the first fruits of your grain and your wine and your oil and the first of your fleece of your sheep you shall give him. It's not going to be any unclothed priests. For Yahweh your God has chosen him out of all your tribes to stand and minister in the name of Yahweh, him and his sons forever.
If you're giving the first of everything to the priest, you're not giving it to the king.
That's right. That's right, because what has Samuel said? They'll take the choicest and the first of everything. Yeah. Let's read further. Not surprisingly, there's another law in this whole section. When you come into the land which Yahweh your God gives you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination, a soothsayer, or an augur, or a sorcerer, or a hypnotist, or a medium, spirit medium, or a wizard, or a necromancer. Tell me, please, from your knowledge of the Bible, when is the first time historically you hear that anyone has come down on mediums? Why does the witch of Endor not want to conjure up the spirit? Because she said, you know that Saul has put to death all the mediums. What is this law for? This law is designed for what? The new monarchy. Saul has put to death all the mediums, she says. Why are you asking me to do this? For whoever does these things is an abomination to Yahweh. Because of these abominable practices, Yahweh your God is driving them out before you. You shall be blameless before Yahweh your God. For these nations which you are about to dispossess give heed to soothsayers and diviners, but as for you, Yahweh your God has not allowed you to do so. Rather, get this, Yahweh your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brethren. Him you shall heed, just as you desired of Yahweh your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, let me not hear again the voice of Yahweh my God, or see this great fire any more, lest I die. And Yahweh said to me, they have rightly said all that they have spoken. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brethren, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And whoever will not give heed to my words which he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. Okay? And among all the things that are set up for monarchy, what's the last and most important? Because the next section, this is the end of the section, the next is rules for holy war, which of course Saul would be given since he's about to initiate a new holy war against the surrounding nations, just as Joshua had started the holy war. But as far as the constitutional rights and duties of kingship, here we end. And just among all these things, what do we end up with? The greatest controlling factor on the monarchy is not the judgeship in all the towns. It's not the high Levitical court. It's not the transference of wealth to the priesthood. It's not the judge who is in office. It's not the high priest. It's what? The prophet. What's the only way you can divine the future? You can't divine the future by normal divination, soothsaying, augury, sorcery, hypnotism, consulting the spirits of the dead, by magical arts, or the activity of the dead. All of those ways of influencing the future are gone. What's the only way you can know the future and have influence, contact with God? Through the prophet. And the prophet stands in the role of Moses. God's words are in his mouth. Therefore what? Just as Moses spoke the law and it had to give it absolute authority, what? This prophet who's going to arise like Moses will have God's absolute authority, and when he speaks, God's words are in his mouth. It's just as important as if what? As if Moses had spoken. And I read between the lines here. You don't have to be particularly subtle. Right? You can be not very bright and read between the lines and figure this out. Who's the prophet who was to be raised up from among the brethren like Moses, who's to be heeded in all things? Can we attach a name here? Is it possible that a name leaps off of the page at us? Are you all getting it? Is there anybody who isn't getting it?
But he immediately goes on to say, and you've been over this with us before, the prophet and the false prophet.
Yes.
Raise it right up at the same time.
Yes, because of course there is going to be the one who doesn't speak according to the law of Moses. And then the law of Moses becomes the norm by which you distinguish which prophet is the true prophet. Okay. Now, let me go back, keep your finger right here, and go back to 1 Samuel 10:25. What did it say? Okay, here stands this king, this preacher of the assembly of the elders. They finally got him. There he is. He's standing there, and Samuel says in verse 24, "Do you see him whom Yahweh has chosen? There is none like him among all the people." And all the people shouted, "Long live the king." Well, Samuel anointed him and set him up. But it immediately says, then, in the midst of all their thrill, Samuel told the people all the mishpat of the kingship and wrote them in a book and laid it up before Yahweh. And we've been reading it, and what? What would you say?
You wrote it.
Doesn't have much to do with the king.
Well, wait a minute. We haven't. I just skipped that deliberately. What have we found out?
Everything else.
And they gave right to what was.
Well, we're going to have a king, all right. But judgeship is, there's going to be a whole legal system outside the control of the king. There's going to be, look, the assembly had represented, with the judge at its head, had represented the legislative branch, right? The assembly will continue in existence. There is a legislative branch, right? In addition, what does Samuel set up? He sets up an entire judiciary from bottom to top. Okay? And he sets up an executive. But this executive is not of the Canaanite king type. This executive is the creature of the assembly. He can only do what this Congress of Elders tells him to do. And they're going to have to supply for. The money is not going to be taken out of the priesthood. Why? The law is that the priests now get the best of everything. And how many get that due among the Levites? All of them. Okay? He is not going to be interpreting the laws and setting precedent. Why? We have an entirely independent judiciary that's going to do that. This president is going to be at the mercy of this Congress. If these wise old men can't find enough money to run this monarchy, what? it's going to be of very limited executive power, right? Samuel has said to the assembly, okay, brethren, you want him, here he is, and he's now given enough rules that it's very clear who's going to have to pay for him. You are. Do you know what George Washington's chief complaint was in his first administration? Congress has not voted enough money to do any of the things we must do. Every State of the Union message that Washington gave for the full 8 years was reeking with his disgust that Congress wouldn't get on with doing the things that needed to be done and raising the money to do it. I mean, this is not something that developed last year, and it has nothing to do with party. Every president that's ever been has said what? If you listen to a president, what's the worst thing in all of God's creation? It's the sitting Congress. Why is everything a mess, according to the president? We could do everything we needed to do, but what? But it's the Congress. This crazy constitutional system that God set up, it was such that the president can't be the king. And therefore he can't do anything because he's not the king. That's the complaint of every president. And isn't it remarkable? You can go from Democratic president to Republican president, and within about 3 months they sound interchangeable. They sound like they're the same person. They've got the same set of complaints. If the press would just stop picking on me, and if the Congress would vote my programs. Right? Well, let's blame Samuel. And of course, Samuel's blaming God. Because Samuel, of course, said, by implication, he's the prophet, and these words here are what? God's words put in his mouth. Now let's read about the kingship. We haven't gotten to that yet. In the midst of all this is the kingship. I'm sure that Bill Clinton doesn't know that this is Samuel's fault, but anyway. Okay. What? Send him the video. Tell him, look, this is 31 centuries old. It's not your fault. We don't hold you responsible for this mess. Okay. When you come into the land which Yahweh your God gives you, and you subdue it and dwell in it, and then say, there could be nothing clearer, there's nothing clearer in the Bible about the time origin of a passage. I'm reading the law of the king. Where is that? Yes. When you come into the land which Yahweh your God gives you, and you possess it and subdue it, and then say, I will set a king over me. When is this? When you've come in, you've subdued it, and you say, the timing is, and when you say, I'll set a king over me. It's very clear. Where's the law about? When is the law about, time-wise? It's about the time when the assembly came to Samuel and said what? We want a king. Do you remember what Samuel did? He consulted with Yahweh and he sent the assembly away. Then he called them back together months later. Well, what was he doing in those months? He was distilling 400 years of Israel's history and the wisdom of his own lifetime into what? Yes, into writing a constitutional system. And he was the prophet, and he was consulting with God, and this is what God gave him. And remember, the Bible's a mingling of the divine and the human, right? This doesn't come out of a heaven whole. It didn't fall on Samuel's head whole, right? Oh, I had the most remarkable vision. I'm so amazed at what I saw. Right? What does God reveal? What people are able to understand and accept. Are we clear on that? Yeah. Okay, and is it a good system? Has it kept despotism from arising? Has it placed a check on the evil of man's nature? Yes. Okay, when you come to the land which Yahweh your God gives you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are round about me. Look, the elders of Israel quoted word for word. Is any accident? You may indeed. Samuel had said what? No? What's he saying now? Saying, yes indeed. Set as king over you him whom Yahweh your God will choose. What had the people done? They had asked for a king. What's this man's name? Past perfect participle. What's his name? What? Shaul. It means what? Asked. The one asked for. The people asked for a king, and what did they get? Mr. Asked For became king. One, very interesting, this never was an issue later on. One from among your brethren you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. That reveals a lot to me. That tells me something that the narrative in 1 Samuel doesn't tell me. Samuel's sons were in Judah. Right? What had clearly been the Judean solution of the problem? Just knuckle under and what? We're the servants of what? Of the Philistine king. That wasn't going to be the deal. Okay? That solution was not going to be the solution. And I suppose that there were some who said, well, the Philistines are all around us, the Ammonites are to the west, they're expanding in Gilead too, why don't we set the Ammonite king over us? So the Moabite king, they're our cousins, instead of these uncircumcised Philistines. Can you see the picture? Some must have said, let's go with the Ammonites. Some said, well, let's go with Moabites. And some said, well, let's just go with the Philistines, instead of fighting them all the time. They beat us every time, let's just make him our king, and then that'll be that. Okay? Nowhere later on does this ever come up. The law has to be at what time? At the time when they were asking for a king. It doesn't relate to any other time. Only, he must not multiply horses for himself or cause the people to turn to Egypt in order to multiply horses. Well, 2 Samuel 8:4. Here's a passage that's always explained, no, not always, nearly always, explained poorly. 2 Samuel 8:4. David is already, let's begin at the beginning, 8:1. After this, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them. And David took Metheg-Ammah out of the hand of the Philistines. And he defeated Moab and measured them with a line, making them lie down on the ground. 2 lines he measured to be put to death, and 1 full line he spared. It's the wild age, isn't it? And the Moabites became slaves to David and brought him tribute. David also defeated Hadadezer, the son of Rechab, the king of Zobah, as he went to restore his power at the river Euphrates. Make no mistake, and we'll follow this through, David was a ruthless man. Safe to be under his wing and unsafe to be his enemy.
Clear to the Euphrates.
Yes, clear to the Euphrates. And David took from him 1,700 horsemen and 20,000 foot soldiers, and David hamstrung all the chariot horses, but left enough for 100 chariots. Well, the explanation for that is David didn't have any use for the horses. That's the usual scholarly answer, and that's nonsense. David ruled over a huge empire, the middle part of the earth, much of which was flat. David had a tremendous use for those chariot horses and chariots. But David was stuck, and I'm sure he wanted to use them, but he was stuck. David was only one king away from Saul. And David was the king of Judah, and he was also the king of Israel. And mark what I'm saying and understand it. David was not the king of Israel, Judah, because there never was such a thing. What was David? He was the king of Judah who became the king of Israel. The elders came and elected him. And when he became the king of Israel, what did he get? Yes. They handed him a little book and said, your old friend Samuel, who anointed you in your youth, he has a letter for you. Here it is. Yes, he wants you to read this.
Memorize.
Yes. All the days, can make a copy while you sit on your throne, the throne of Israel. And we'll be back in a few days to see if you've got it down. If you want to be king of Israel. And did David want to be king of Israel? Yes, because David knew that unless you were a king of both Israel and Judah, what? You couldn't control. You couldn't control the middle part of the earth.
That were 1,000 contingent or really 1,000?
No. When you get to the empire, they have a new numbering system, and now we're talking about real numbers. All right, now look. The reason that David did not integrate the chariotry into his army was he was stuck with the still in effect, still highly regarded, still seriously taken law of the king. Ahab had huge chariotry later. Why? Because Ahab lived 200 years later and chose to ignore this section of the law. And people let him. Well, most people. He was stuck with the annoying presence of Elijah.
Did the code say not to take the horses and not to take them from your people? Why could he take them from the enemies he conquered?
It says he must not multiply horses for himself.
Serious.
Yeah. All right. Now here's one that the elders of Israel couldn't do anything about in David's case because it was too late by the time they elected him king to deal with it. It was too late. If they wanted David, they were stuck on this line. And he shall not multiply wives for himself, lest his heart turn away. By the time they decided that they wanted David as king, what? What? No, he had 24 wives that we know about, and then besides, the text breaks off by saying besides the others. Now, we're going to look at who he married. And who do you think he married?
Those of the kings of the
Yeah. Well, in Israel and Judah, he'd marry the daughters of the elders of Israel and Judah. In the Philistines, he'd marry the daughters of the kings. In the case of Moab, Edom, Ammon, and the Gesher, and the 3 or 4 Aramean states, Syrian states, and in the case of the Phoenicians, what? He married the princesses.
And when we come to Saul,
Saul had one wife.
Saul, he was just following in his father's footsteps.
Yes, yes. David chose the son that he liked. The son that he liked had qualities he didn't have, and he recognized that. Solomon was sophisticated in ways that David wasn't, but Solomon had some bad qualities that were very much like his father. And we always blame Solomon, right?
Yeah.
We always say he was the one that went amok. Right away you read this and say, oh, this is about... No. Saul, on the other hand, had one wife. A woman named Ahinoam of Jezreel. The name is found only once in the Bible. It happens that David had a wife named Ahinoam of Jezreel. The only time that the name is ever found in the Bible is found right at this time, and we either have to deal with the remarkable coincidence that there were two Heman of Jezreel living at the same time, or else we have to deal with the dark and nasty possibility that what?
That David married the mother of his wife.
Wives. Merab and Michal were both his wives. He married sisters.
Well, it was customary that the king coming in with her took care of the women of the kingdom.
The king who overcomes the previous king takes the previous king's wives. That is absolutely the case. And we're going to come upon an unhappy statement where the prophet says to David, I gave you Saul's kingdom, his wives and his daughters. The prophet explicitly says that David took Saul's wives and his daughters. Before Saul was dead, David had married the princesses of every kingdom surrounding Israel and had taken Saul's wife and daughters from him. Now Saul went crazy, we say. Yeah. All right. Now, what were we doing here? We're going to come along to David in a moment. That's not the story here. The story here is Samuel writing the Constitution for the monarchy.
David was a man after God's own heart.
Yeah. Well, you know who wrote that.
You shall never return that way again. Well, we're going to discuss David being a man after God's own heart and why he was honored. We'll discuss the pros and the cons.
The timing on this was not after Saul's death. It was before Saul died that he had his wife.
Well, you see, David ruled as king of Judah for 7 years. And Ishbaal, David's counterpart, Saul's son, who inherited the throne after David's death, the only one of Saul's sons that survived, reigned only 2 years. That means that for 5 years of Saul's reign, prior to his end, David was a rival king in Judah, serving as a client king of the Philistines when Saul was trying to destroy them. Now, what would that make you think?
And you already had Saul's daughters.
Well, but it was tit for tat. There's much more behind this story. We're going to find how David really came to the court of Saul and what really happened, and let me assure you that if David appears cruel when you listen to this, that he was mild compared to Saul, who was far crueler. And we're going to see that momentarily. This turned into a nightmare for everybody in very short order, including the Philistines, who probably wish they had never gotten involved in any of this. And he shall not multiply wives for himself, lest his heart turn away. And he shall, nor shall he greatly multiply for himself silver and gold. And, you know, Gibeah of Saul has been excavated. Gibeah of Saul has been excavated. Right? And it was just a very small fortress, 20 acres. There was nothing lavish about it at all. Saul lived to the end of his days as a citizen king in a very small section of a small fortress. Now, this law was clearly very much in effect. He had no more wealth than he already had as a wealthy man from a wealthy family. And he didn't do any of these things. He didn't multiply horses. He didn't multiply wives. He didn't multiply silver or gold. It's clear that this law was written when? At the inception of monarchy. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law from that which is in charge of the Levitical priests. Remember the Levitical priests, the whole tribe of Levi? And so that would be either at the temple or wherever they might choose, or it might be at the high court, the site of the high court. And it shall be with him, and he shall read in it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear Yahweh his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brethren, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment either to the right hand or the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. Here is a constitutional, get this, here is a constitutional, conditional, hereditary monarchy. I'm going to say it 3 or 4 more times so you can write it down. What? I'm reading the last line of chapter 17. So that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. Who should have been the next king? Which son? Jonathan. Much will become clear. Much will become clear. If the heir apparent makes a secret covenant to make somebody else the king, how would you feel? If you discovered a plot between your own son and somebody else to make that other person the king, would you feel a little betrayed? All of this will become clear. Here's a constitutional, conditional, hereditary monarchy. Where's the law of the king? Where's the mishpat, the legal constitution of kingship, as it says? Deuteronomy? No. Where's the legal constitutional right of the king? Where is it? Deuteronomy 16, 18, 2 to 18, 18 and verse 22. You got it? You understand that I'm telling you it's the entire section. The thing that refers to the king itself is only a paragraph of the whole thing. That's intentional. 16:18 to 18:22. Now when we get over there then to 1 Samuel 10, verse 25. Then Samuel told the people of the Mishpat the constitutional rights of the kingship, and wrote them in a scroll and laid it up before Yahweh. We're referring to Deuteronomy 16:18 to 18:22, and you might as well put it in the margin so that you have a record in Samuel of what's being referred to. Is it very clear that this is what's being referred to? Gives us another picture of the growth of the book of Deuteronomy, doesn't it? Yes, it is. It is. Where did all that stuff from the prophetic schools go? If they had great schools, why didn't any of it get survived? Well, it's all here. What? Oh, several of them. We're coming to the who was responsible and was there a cover-up is the next section. The whole section the whole document called the History of David's Rise, HDR, is a question of who was really responsible and was there a cover-up. We're coming to that. That's certainly going to occupy us for a while. All right. So what do you think of what Samuel did? Was it a masterstroke? He must have been a good judge to be able to take a crisis like this and turn it into an opportunity. Yeah?
But he had been prepared for it all as he came.
Well, yes, he was the man for the time. That's right.
You gotta figure that Macintosh did this his entire life, basically, from the time he was a child, would be a man of no mean talent.
That's true. Yes, that's right.
And had the chance to see the other one, the prophets before him too. That was prophetic before him.
Well, technically, the judges before him. There weren't any prophets before him, technically. Prophecy, we just saw where prophecy came from.
Well,
And we're going to see it in detail in 1 Samuel 12. What does he do? We now see that he has split judgeship into judge, prophet, king, priesthood. It's got them all there. But the two that really are vying in contention are the prophet and the king, right?
When this prophets came in, talked about Saul going into the frenzy. What's the word that's really used there?
That's the same thing. Now we're going to talk about charismatic and non-charismatic prophecy when we get there. We're going to talk about the political chapters first. And then we're going to talk about the chapters about Saul. It's also the prophetic movement about miracles and so forth. Now, it says in the book of Judges that God raised up for them a deliverer in Jephthah. And it's got the same words it has for all the other judges, that God raised up a deliverer, and then there's a story about how the Spirit of God came and possessed him. Of course, the other story in Judges about Jephthah is that the assembly were desperate because of the Ammonite king, right? They couldn't find anyone, they couldn't save themselves. He had been thrown out because he was a harlot's son. He was the head of a group of outlaws and was a mighty man, it says. So because he was a Gileadite, remember, they sent to him. They offered him to be Qasim, military leader. He said, nothing doing, you're the people who threw me out, why are you coming to me now? Besides, I wouldn't be Qasim anyway. If I was going to be the head over you, I'd require at the very minimum to become the chief of Gilead. And the assembly got this message back, and they debated it and decided what? They figured, as in the later case, that they had nothing to lose, so what? They gave him the chiefship. Okay? And then they sent him out to war. But notice in Judges 11 what it says. It's very interesting. Because the same pattern is right here in 1 Samuel with our first king. He says in verse 9, Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, if you bring me home again to fight with the Ammonites, and Yahweh gives them over to me, I will be your chief. The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, Yahweh will be witness between us. We will surely do as you say. So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him both chief and ruler, military leader over them. And Jephthah recited all his oaths before Yahweh at Mizpah. Jephthah, make sure you translate it properly, recited all his oaths before Yahweh at Mizpah. When did Jephthah become the designated chief? Has he fought with the Ammonites yet? No. Let me refer you here to the board and to what we have said about Baal on many occasions. Baal is like an old friend now, right? Baal used to be this awesome demon god in our minds, and now he's just Baal. An old friend. Marduk in the Enuma Elish, exactly the same story. The assembly of the gods is on the cosmic mountain. In Enuma Elish it's Tiamat. In the Baal epic it's Yam, the sea. But in any case, it's the gods of the underworld, the gods of chaos, the gods of the ocean. have challenged the gods of life to the cosmic battle for life and death. And there's consternation. The two stories are just the eastern and western end of the Fertile Crescent, the same story. There's consternation. They don't know what to do. After much debate, it's an assembly of the gods, right? It's the heavenly assembly. Whenever the earthly assembly meets, what? Well, there were 70 elders of Israel in Exodus and Numbers, right? 70 elders, like the 70 in the heavenly assembly. Same story. The assembly needs a champion. They choose a designated champion. Okay? They acclaim him king. And what they say in these things is Baal is king. Just like it says Yahweh is king in the poetry there. In 2 Samuel, what is that? 2 Samuel 15, 10 to 13. Let's look at it, see what it says. Who's this about? Oh, let's see. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Pray, let me go pay a vow, for I have vowed to Yahweh in Hebron." Hebron was the capital of Judah. Do you remember that? Hebron was the capital of Judah. I'm reading verse 7. Verse 8. "For your servant vowed a vow while I dwelt in Geshur and Aram, saying, If Yahweh will indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I'll go worship to Yahweh. The king said to him, Go in peace. So he rose and went to Hebron. But Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, Absalom is king at Hebron." See those words? Identical to the words you find in the great myths. Okay, and so Absalom made himself king in Hebron, just as his father had done before him. What is this? 1 Kings 1, 5 to 11? Well, you know what that's about. 1 Kings 1. This is Adonijah made himself king, remember? Got himself anointed and so forth. And what did they say when they went down there? They swore, where is it? Adonijah is king. Okay. And what did David do? David had those who were with him take Solomon and go anoint him. And notice 125, long live King Adonijah. And what did they say instead about Solomon? Long live King Solomon, verse 34. And long live the king then comes from these ancient myths into the Bible, and from there to us. What happens next? The champion now is designated, but what has he got to do? Yeah, nothing's happened yet. He's not really the king, so what? Yeah. He goes to war, is eventually victorious, returns, same pattern identically, and is enthroned as king forever, which means an eternal dynasty, right? Is enthroned as king forever. Saul is appointed Nagid, a word that in the context of the Deuteronomic history we're going to see is a word that always means the designated king. The designated king. He's the Nagid. It's synonymous with Melech in this sense. He's the king, just hasn't what? Just hasn't proven himself yet. Well, Solomon was Nagid. Did he ever prove himself? Did he ever go?
That's what I was going to ask. Solomon never went to war.
Solomon never went to war, did he? He didn't come back victorious, did he? Well, it all depends on who you were. If you were Abiathar, or if you were Joab, or if you were, who were the others? Adonijah. If you were anyone who has sided with Adonijah, you soon found yourself what? Dead. How did Solomon go to war and prove himself king? He started out as an unlikely teenager with all these older brothers vying for power in the empire. And with all those wives, you can be sure there were lots of them, right? And the oldest ones had all killed each other. And Adonijah was the oldest living one who hadn't been killed yet in the struggle for power. And here was the youngest son, the teenage son, who came to the throne, and a lot of people must have said, what? He'll be there for a week or so, and then what? Then the brothers would do him in, but what did he do? The teenage boy showed his wisdom by what? He didn't have to deal with any coups. Why? He killed everybody who was against him right at the outset. Before anybody got a chance to have a coup, what? He looked for any excuse he could to kill them, and before you know it, they were all dead. And what did those who had any ideas soon decide? Maybe he is king. Yes. But after all, we have great estates, and are powerful and wealthy and have a good life. Maybe we don't need to cross Solomon after all. And what did everybody know? That the boy king was what? Was not to be crossed. Yes. And that's how he went to war. The designated king becomes king after the victory forever. And so he stood there as a designated king on that day when Samuel proclaimed the constitutional rights of kingship. Okay? Picture is coming clearer now, isn't it? I always hate those weeks when we're just plunging in. Read it again.
What's the second word here?
Melech, you know that word, M-E-L-E-K, king. It's just a simple word for king. Yeah. We have just scratched the surface of 1 Samuel 8 to 12. By January 8th, what will you have done? Well, you have read it numbers of times? I like the sound of that. All right. Thank you very much.